As India embarks on its accelerated growth journey, we are firmly placed to leave our mark in it. Together, we touch millions of lives and make them better every day.
पेश है कलश प्रीमियम कलर कोटेड स्टील जिसमें खुले हैं ऐसे रंग जो बदलते वक्त में भी रहे हमेशा आपके साथ. A quality product by ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India.
As a building block in the self-reliant India story, JSPL succeeds when India grows. JSPL, contributing towards self-reliant India, humbly serving the nation.
As India embarks on its accelerated growth journey, we are firmly placed to leave our mark in it. Together, we touch millions of lives and make them better every day.
पेश है कलश प्रीमियम कलर कोटेड स्टील जिसमें खुले हैं ऐसे रंग जो बदलते वक्त में भी रहे हमेशा आपके साथ. A quality product by ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India.
As a building block in the self-reliant India story, JSPL succeeds when India grows. JSPL, contributing towards self-reliant India, humbly serving the nation.
As India embarks on its accelerated growth journey, we are firmly placed to leave our mark in it. Together, we touch millions of lives and make them better every day.
पेश है कलश प्रीमियम कलर कोटेड स्टील जिसमें घुले हैं ऐसे रंग जो बदलते वक्त में भी रहे हमेशा आपके साथ अ क्वालिटी प्रोडक्ट बाय ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India.
As a building block in the self-reliant India story, JSPL succeeds when India grows. JSPL, contributing towards self-reliant India, humbly serving the nation.
As India embarks on its accelerated growth journey, we are firmly placed to leave our mark in it. Together, we touch millions of lives and make them better every day.
पेश है कलश प्रीमियम कलर कोटेड स्टील जिसमें घुले हैं ऐसे रंग जो बदलते वक्त में भी रहे हमेशा आपके साथ अ क्वालिटी प्रोडक्ट बाय ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India.
As a building block in the self-reliant India story, JSPL succeeds when India grows. JSPL, contributing towards self-reliant India, humbly serving the nation.
As India embarks on its accelerated growth journey, we are firmly placed to leave our mark in it. Together, we touch millions of lives and make them better every day.
पेश है कलश प्रीमियम कलर कोटेड स्टील जिसमें घुले हैं ऐसे रंग जो बदलते वक्त में भी रहे हमेशा आपके साथ अ क्वालिटी प्रोडक्ट बाय ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India.
As a building block in the self-reliant India story, JSPL succeeds when India grows. JSPL, contributing towards self-reliant India, humbly serving the nation.
Are you all able to hear me? Just give me a thumbs up. Are you all able to hear me? Ranjan sir is also here.
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, sir, please put your mic on mute. We are starting now. Good afternoon, namaskar, hello and welcome everyone. I'm back with a new program today. The pandemic is not yet over. We still have cases and the new wave at the corner. Please take utmost care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Monica Bachchan. I'm a founder of Metalogic Projects Management Services. We call it a maximum women staff organization, having a 80% women staff. Today on 9th of September, we are presenting you webinar on Realigning FTAs for India, sponsored by ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India, JSW Steel Limited, and Jindal Steel and Power Limited. This is our 37th webinar during COVID-19 pandemic. I hope you have gained an insight from our last webinar on Indian merchant mining, which was held on 25th of August. The recording of that webinar is available on our YouTube channel. Please do not miss to subscribe to youtube.com/Metalogic PMS for steel and mining related videos. This webinar is currently live on youtube.com/Metalogic PMS. In case you find any difficulty from GoToWebinar software, you can watch the live version on our channel. Viewers, I'd like to make a mention that Metalogic has come up with a new portal, mymetalogic.com. So all the webinars are being converted into a report format, which you can easily find on MyMetalogic. Please do not miss to subscribe at 500 rupees per month basis. Just a short housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the panel discussion, please type them into your GoToWebinar control panel into the question box. I will bring them up during the presentation, and we will also have time for questions at the end. Always mention your company name and organization which you are representing and who would you like to address your question to. We will also be having few audience poll questions, which are always exciting, and I know our audience participates for that. So watch the program very carefully until the end. Your vote matters. Before we start, I would like to give a little brief about the program. We all are aware that a free trade agreement, which we call FTA, is an agreement according to international law to form a free trade area between the cooperating countries. FTAs determine the tariffs and duty that countries impose on imports and exports with the goal of reducing or eliminating trade barriers, thus encouraging international trade. Such agreements usually include chapters providing for preferential tariffs treatment along with clauses on trade facilitation and rule making in areas such as investments, intellectual property, government procurement, technical standards, and sanitary and physiosanitary issues. The core fundamental of any FTA should be based on providing a balanced support to the partner countries. Reciprocity, or the practice of exchanging things, service, privileges with other for mutual benefits, is the essence of FTAs. However, in the case of Indian steel, the existing FTAs, that is with Japan and Korea, have been solely one-sided since their inception, wherein India has been always on the receiving end. The imports from these two countries or on a pre or post FTA companies have been shown a mammoth increase of 250% rise in the imports, both in value and volume terms. India's merchandise trade deficit with ASEAN, Japan, and Korea has also risen substantially over the pre and post FTA period. Now, as India prepares for signing new FTAs, it is important that there should be a thorough review of the FTAs and a proper due diligence to assess the long-term impact with the new partner nations. Today, our webinar will highlight some of the concerns from the existing FTAs and give a direction for future FTAs with government may take into account for deliberations. Today, our expert panelists are Dr. James J. Nedumpara, Professor and Head Center for Trade and Investment Law at IIFT. Mr. Sharad Mahendra, CEO at JSW Steel Coated Products Limited. Mr. Ranjan Dhar, Chief Marketing Officer at ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India. Mr. Najib Shah, IRS, former Chairman, Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs. He will be joining us by 3:25 p.m. Mr. S. Seetharaman, co-founder and specialist in international trade and WTO laws at Sarvada Legal. Hello. And Dr. Murali Kallummal, Professor, Center for WTO Studies at IIFT. And I'm your moderator. To start with, I would like to welcome Dr. James J. Nedumpara, Professor, Head, Center for Trade and Investment Law, IIFT, to please open the session and set the theme of the program. I would like to welcome you, sir. Request you to please unmute your mic, sir.
So thank you, Monica. Thank you, the other esteemed members of the panel. In fact, this topic that you have organized for today's discussion is extremely important, and it is extremely contemporary. We know that free trade agreements, either shallow free trade agreements or even comprehensive agreements, like mega regionals, have been flourishing in recent times. In the last 20 years, many countries have signed multiple agreements. Sometimes there has been overlap in the nature and the participants as well. But the unavoidable truth is that no country can basically stay outside the free trade agreement system. If you look at the kind of academic debate that happened a long time ago, the question was whether free trade agreements are basically a building block or a stumbling block to the multilateral trading system. The multilateral trading system, as we know, is now 70 years old. The multilateral trading system has got more participants. Now it has got 164 members. But at the same time, the system is going through some difficult times. The negotiation function of the multilateral trading system is fairly slow. In the last 20 years, the members have been able to agree on only one particular agreement, the trade facilitation agreement. If you look at some of the recent negotiations, obviously the fisheries subsidies negotiation of the WTO is actually a matter of promise. And the general belief is that by November this year, there will be some outcome at the ministerial conference, which is going to happen in Geneva, co-hosted by the WTO and Kazakhstan. But at the same time, when we think about the free trade agreements, it is very difficult to get any kind of a monolithic or a homogeneous voice on this point. Some people will benefit out of the free trade agreements, and some people will definitely suffer out of this agreement. But as a nation, the challenge is to make sure that every participant, every stakeholder in the system gets a fair chance. And that is why, when countries negotiate free trade agreements or other categories of comprehensive agreements, they will have to engage with the stakeholders, get their feedback, not on the sector as a whole, but even on individual tariff lines, and make sure that how this deal can positively work for the country as a whole. So when we think about various trade agreements that India has signed with other countries, the major challenge has been with the Southeast Asian countries. And the Southeast Asian countries, especially Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, and obviously even the recent RCEP agreement actually brings to limelight, or it really reflects the kind of concerns that stakeholders have. Especially with respect to the Southeast Asian region, we shouldn't also lose sight of the fact that it is perhaps the most competitive region in the world. So when we are actually going for a free trade agreement with this group of competitive countries, the challenges will be heavier. So but at the same time, we should not forget that that region is the most effective and the most competitive world, and the most promising place to make an investment or to engage in trade with. So the challenges will be much higher. So that is why there is a great need for calibration. There is a high need for understanding the sensitivities of the various sectors, and we have to also look at the larger picture. So when we really look at the cost and benefits of free trade agreements, generally speaking, we tend to look at the very short window period. Maybe in the last 4 or 5 years, or maybe in the last 10 years, this FTA might not have actually resulted in trade gains. Sometimes it basically contributed to the yawning kind of a trade deficit. So what can actually be done? The one important point is that when we think about trade agreements, we generally know that they are signed for perpetuity. So there is no end date in mind. In the context of WTO agreements, there is not even a review provision. So some of the free trade agreements have included a review provision, and the review provision is actually a good time and a location for countries to get back to the negotiating table and address some of the concerns. So some of the concerns may be flowing from the design features of the agreement. Sometimes it may be flowing from the implementation related provisions of the agreement. So the point is that every agreement can actually cut both ways, and every country will have offensive interest and defensive interest. So when we think about it, I think the larger issue is that before any country goes into a trade agreement, it will have to actually take into account the entirety of the picture, how the situation is likely to pan out in the future. That kind of an analysis will have to be undertaken. That is why we have got think tanks like ours and Professor Murali's think tank. They have been doing this kind of exercises. But that is why we have got organizations like Metalogic that provides specific industry inputs for the negotiation. So while actually talking about these things, the other important point is that there is nothing like absolute free trade. And when we go in for even free trade agreements, countries will have to actually pick their interests first. They can ask for a longer time, I think, tariff liberalization phase. Sometimes you can actually go for an interim agreement to find out to what extent some of the early benefits of the agreement can be harvested. Sometimes it is very important to provide for trade remedial mechanisms, because these mechanisms are actually very important in order to preserve the balance of concessions. So as Monica mentioned right at the beginning of her talk, every trade agreement is actually built on the premise of reciprocity, or it is actually built on the concept of give and take. So if a particular group of industries or products are going to suffer disproportionately, then there should be a mechanism to actually reset the agreement. So a review provision is an absolutely good provision. It actually provides an opportunity for all the stakeholders and the parties to do a stock taking and come to a common conclusion as to what sector has to be renegotiated, what provision has to be renegotiated, whether the trade remedy provisions are good enough, can these remedies be enforced quickly and effectively, should there be some kind of an auto trigger mechanism. All these things are absolutely important. So let me actually just point out something related to safeguard mechanism. We know that in the context of agriculture products, it is very difficult to actually take the normal kind of a safeguard mechanism, because the domestic industry is absolutely fragmented. They may not be maintaining kind of cost and accounting data for that matter. So when the most vulnerable section of your country or your economy is going to be impacted by these agreements, there should be a mechanism to take into account their concerns and then make sure that these concerns are positively reflected in the trade agreements.
Right.
So let me
right.
put it this way. I will just conclude it here. A trade agreement provides immense opportunity, but we have to also do the hard work and make sure that the right provisions are there in the most important agreements. So thank you for this opportunity.
So much, Dr. James, for this wonderful opening remark, and this has really set the theme. And before we start part one, I would like to raise one poll question to our audience. Audience, the question is on your screen. Please start voting. So the question is, have the existing FTAs with Japan and Korea been one-sided for Indian manufacturing? Do you agree? Your options are yes or no. Do you think the existing FTAs with Japan and Korea been one-sided for Indian manufacturing? And people watching on YouTube, please start voting as sending your comments in the comment section of YouTube. Have the existing FTAs with Japan and Korea been one-sided for Indian manufacturing? Please be very, very quick. We will not be able to give much time for voting. So you have to be very alert all the time. Okay, so we have the results. The bars are moving. Results on your screen. So 67% of our audience feels yes, whereas 33% feels no. So 67% feels that the FTAs have been one-sided with Japan and Korea. Now we are opening the panel discussion with part one, where we will be discussing issues faced by Indian steel manufacturers and exporters. For this part, we have Mr. Ranjan Dhar, Chief Marketing Officer of ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India, and Mr. Sharad Mahendra, the CEO of JSW Steel Coated Products Limited. So we have Mr. Ranjan and Mr. Sharad a few questions for you, and I would like to request you to please answer one by one based on your experiences. So my first question to the panel is, Mr. Sharad and Mr. Ranjan, as a steel manufacturer and exporter, what challenges are you facing due to India's FTA with various countries? We will start with Mr. Ranjan Dhar. Sir, your comments, please.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. And yeah, thank you, Monica. Am I clear? Is the voice clear? There's some issue with the connectivity. I don't know whether it's clear or not.
It's very much clear, sir.
Yeah. So I think we have to go back to the basic concept why these FTAs were done. The FTAs were done so that there is a free trade. That is what the name suggests. So the free trade has to be in the essence of free trade. There has to be a concept of reciprocity, that the trade that one country does with another, there has to be a reciprocal trade that should happen from that country to this country also. Now, from that perspective, and I'm limiting our discussion to steel. I don't know about other products, but as far as steel is concerned, it has been totally one-sided. It is good that we did the FTA, the free trade agreement was signed at some point in time in 2010 with one country and 2011 and with the other country. Now we have the power of data with us in all these through all these years. The entire trade in the steel space has been one-sided. There is hardly any trade, in fact, to a very negligible number in terms of percentage and in terms of metric ton, which has happened from India to Japan and Korea. And what has happened is, what was 11% of the share of the trade in 2011 from these two countries, Korea and Japan, South Korea and Japan, that has gone to as high as 95% in the year 2021 financial year. So that is the kind of swing which has happened in this year, and it proves that this has not been beneficial for the Indian steel manufacturer. If the trade had happened, that the steel would have come from this country to India and our steel would have also gone there, it was a balanced trade. But it is totally unbalanced trade, and therefore it does not serve the purpose of Indian Steel Company. And there's no reason why in India such an import should happen, because we have our own steel and all quality of steel available today for the usage of the Indian steel customers. And I think one important aspect I should mention here in this entire clamor of steel prices globally and all that, one of the benefits that steel customers in India are getting due to domestic steel industry is the reason why the domestic prices of steel are perpetually at a discount to the international benchmark. Though there has been clamor, the steel prices have gone up. Yes, they've gone up. But if you compare the Indian steel prices with respect to what is there in the global market, through this entire steel price increase, Indian customer has been benefited to a large extent, as high as 20% or more, because of the steel available in India. So and now the steel is not getting imported because there's a differential. So only when these people have excess capacity, they want to dump using the garb of free trade. That is happening. It is not helping the Indian steel industry at all, is my view.
Right, Ranjanji. Sharadji, your view, please. Do you think, as a steel manufacturer and importer, what challenges you have been facing under FTAs with various countries?
Thanks, Monica, and thanks once again. What I'll like to repeat what Dr. James said. Thanks for organizing this discussion on such an important aspect for in general the Indian industry and also steel specific. But before I come to steel specific challenges being faced by the steel industry, in line with what Dr. James said, I also feel that these FTAs are a very positive step in creating a global trade environment. This is very important, but most important in this is that this is a fair and a level playing field for all the countries, and also all industries, not only in terms of value from one country to other, industry specific, which Dr. James also said. Each industry needs to be looked differently. Taking an example, very good example given by him for the fragmented industry like the agri equipment and others. So it has to, everything cannot be, all industries cannot be looked in a similar way. And also touching upon and giving some more details on, we have enough data to collaborate the impact of the question which you asked to the audience also, that whether it's a one-sided FTA with Japan, Korea or ASEAN countries. If we see the trade deficit, 10 years pre-FTA and 10 years post-FTA, that is the exact period we have now crossed, 10 years post-FTA. The trade deficit, if we take from Japan, in terms of steel-specific and engineering goods, from 3.9 million tons trade deficit 10 years prior to the FTA signing, reached a level of 13.3 million tons 10 years post-FTA. Increase of 240% from Japan. Similarly, from Korea, the same number is from 5.6 to almost 23 million tons. So that kind of trade deficit has resulted, which clearly indicates some of the points can be definitely said that maybe the capability and the capacity in India. Capacity in India has always been there. Capability in last 10 years, if we see, the way the capability in producing the required grade, high grade steels catering to the high demanding sectors, whether it is auto sector or white goods sector, all the capabilities exist in India now, and not today, maybe last 8 years, 9 years. But the review mechanism of the FTA condition, which was also touched upon by Dr. James, is very important. We do not have a structured or a trigger mechanism of if there is any significant change, automatically it gets highlighted. Then the industries start making representations and that keeps on going. But that is not able to overrule what has already been signed. Just to give an example, not apart from only the steel industry, assuming in general, maybe 7.5 to 10% duty, just alone in FY21, the trade from Japan and Korea has, with a value of almost close to $2.17 billion, assuming 10% only, government of India also has lost close more than $200 million. So this is my assumption, is that it has to be a fair field. The challenges being faced, it should not be looked upon in a generic way, and only it is the way forward. Whatever has got transpired in last 10 years cannot be changed, but at least we have enough data to study the impact and going forward to be more intelligent in terms of deciding on the FTA terms with the countries, because there are many other which are being taken by countries in terms of non-tariff barriers and others. Despite FTA, there are chances that non-tariff barriers and other conditions putting and ensuring that there is no benefit in terms of the FTA to a particular country. That is my view.
Sir. With this, I would like to ask my next question to Ranjan ji and Sharad ji. Have the FTA helped the exporters to gain better market access across the world, Ranjan ji?
If the question is related to the Indian exporters better access to the world market, the answer is clearly no. As a result of FTA. As a result of FTA, definitely no, because for these countries, our exports from the data is minimal. We have done some 18,000 ton in 1 year or 20,000 ton in another year. That is the kind of number that we have done. And that is also largely to one of the two FTA, that is South Korea. and Japan, it is actually nothing. So it has not given any, yes, from the optics perspective, that when we sign an FTA, you become more globalized as a country, and you become a more ease of doing business as a country. But as my fellow panelist, Mr. Mahendra was saying, that we have the power of data also with us now. So you can see what has happened, and there's no room for any perception and decision-based perception. It is decision-based data. So the 10-year data said that it has not helped us open up any new market. Rather contrary, we have actually gone to the newer markets, and actually that proves the prowess of Indian steel in the quality terms. That today Indian steel is accepted from the quality perspective across globe. There is hardly any country, even the most stringent quality countries like even Europe or South Korea. Even when the US was open, we were sending to US. So from the quality perspective, we have established our prowess. But FT has not, unfortunately, not helped us at all.
Sharad ji, your view, please.
Yeah, there is nothing much. Exactly. I will also like to say that definitely it has not helped Indian steel industry at all. Taking a clue, I'll just like to give one specific number, otherwise it will be a repetition. Just to give an example, if we see the steel exports from India to Vietnam in year FY 2021, it is hardly maybe a few thousands, not even 5,000 tons or 10,000 tons. And you see the import from Vietnam to India. So definitely it has not at all helped India in any way, we will say, especially with the countries under FTA. Because apart from, even if commercially the companies need to take a call to be competitive, we have to ensure, we have to keep in mind the kind of capacities available in Japan and Korea especially is significantly higher than their domestic requirement.
Right.
So for cater to that requirement of domestic, which is maybe 60% of the total capacity available, is the requirement in domestic. To cater to that, they have to run their steel plants, and they are ready. Ready to export anywhere. So that is one I feel that FTA definitely has not at all helped, is my view also, and our data to various countries also show that.
Right. So I have a last question, then we will move on to Mr. Najib Shah. He is with us now. So my last question to you, Ranjan ji and Sharad ji, have FTA been instrumental in deploying inward-looking policies by various countries? Ranjan ji, your view.
I don't think not necessarily whether FTA has made that. I think inward-looking policies by various countries has been the agenda on that is a bit more larger than the FTA alone. Now, if you see, take for example India, our Atmanirbhar policy, which is the 2.0 of Make in India policy, the Atmanirbhar policy has gained very large momentum, I would say. And the reason for that was the disruption that the pandemic threw at us. So that disruption actually made us think that how to be, you see what is happening today in the automobile space, for example, the semiconductor shortage. Now, if we had thought about semiconductors, the answer that it should be produced in India about 5 years, 7 years back, we would have been all be ready. So I think those geopolitical and supply chain issues are driving inward-looking policy. And I think for India, a populous country like India, on top of that, we have to look as infrastructure, manufacturing, agriculture as the prime movers of our job creation. Because we have to look at that. We cannot be a service-oriented economy because we are a populous country. Lot amount of inward-looking policy in terms of making India self-reliant on various aspects will also be to cater to the domestic demand, and that will propel the virtuous cycle of increasing the per capita income of the people in the country and increasing the purchasing power. I think from a larger agenda, that is the right thing to do, not necessarily from a limited perspective of FTA.
Right, sir. Sharad, sir, your point. And
Yeah,
Ranjan, sir,
Monica.
mute yourself. After that, we will start with Mr. Najib Shah, sir. Sir.
See, yes, I feel that definitely these FTAs are enabling countries to look inward. And even the countries not under FTA today are getting prepared, they're making themselves prepared, that assuming that, knowing that maybe FTAs, it's just a matter of time. They have started looking inward, is the way I see it, by ensuring and protecting the business post FTA. Also, the various scenarios are being thought of, what will happen, what will be the impact. Though India is behaving differently, which I'll come to, but like in terms of focusing more on non-tariff barriers is going to be a thing, I say, and will be playing a major dominance even with the FTA countries, which we see from Japan and others. But coming to India, I think India is behaving differently, looking inward in a very, very positive way, which has been like when we see that Atmanirbhar Bharat focus on MSMEs, making India as a global export hub for engineering goods through the MSMEs. So there are various positive, which increases the demand, increases the manufacturing in India, employment in India. So there are many positive steps which India has started looking inward in a much better way. I will say, when I compare this aspect of the business with various countries, developed or emerging economies or developed economies, I will rate India's approach going forward next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years as the most positive and sustainable approach by looking inward in a positive way.
Right, sir. So with this, we will start our part 2. I request you, Sharad sir, to please mute yourself. And before I start part 2, I'm raising one poll question to our audience. Audience, the question is on your screen. Please start voting. The question is, staying out of RCEP was a good decision for India. Do you agree or you don't agree? Yes or no? Please start voting. Staying out of RCEP was a good decision for India. You think it was good decision? Press yes. If you think it was not a good decision, press no. And people watching on YouTube, please post your comments in the comment section of YouTube. Yeah, so we again have the results now. I'm sharing the results. So 80% of our audience feels that staying out of RCEP was a good decision, while 20% feels no. So we will go with the majority. So now we have Mr. Najib Shah, IRS, former chairman, Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Custom with us. Thank you for joining us, sir, and taking out time for us from your busy schedule. So you can unmute yourself, sir.
I have unmuted. Thank you for having me.
So I'll start with a few questions. First of all, what I would like to know, India is planning to sign an array of FTAs with an intent to promote exports. So what is your comment on that? Are FTA the only way to enhance exports, do you think?
I missed what the earlier panelists have spoken, but let me tell you, I don't think FTA are the only way to increase our exports. FTA is just one such medium, and going by our past track record, it has not really been very useful. Imports through these FTA countries have been far more than the exports. But hopefully lessons have been learned, and which is the reason why we are going into this array of FTAs. remember again, each one of these countries again are countries with whom we have been having talks for long periods of time. EU, we started off in 2013, Australia, UK, Israel, UAE, and through UAE to the GCC. Hopefully, that's what is the stated aim. So I believe India, hopefully, well, going forward to these FTAs, has learned its lessons from its experience of its previous FTAs, will take the trade and industry along with them closely, find out what are the challenges which each one of these countries face. The only immediate advantage which I can tell you is that in most of our other FTAs, we had a language and cultural barrier also. At least now we're going to deal with English-speaking countries largely. So where our exporters will not have that much of a challenge. Right, in the ASEAN, we had this major challenge. I'm aware of it on a personal basis. So yes, I would think while FTAs are not the only way to increase exports, they are a key means. And this concern which we have of wanting to be in the global value chain as being one of the reasons for going to the FTA, in my opinion, is completely misplaced. We have any number of schemes by which you can get duty-free imports, do your value addition and export. And FTA is not the only route, because FTA is a two-way street, like I keep mentioning. So you have to be prepared for duty-free or concessional goods also coming into the country. And I'm again aware of various domestic industries getting decimated by preferential imports coming into the country. So we have to be aware of all the consequences and weigh our pros and cons and go forward very carefully.
So recently I read one of the interview in Economic Times, which was published on 1st of September, where you have mentioned that Indian government is being very enthusiastic in signing FTAs and we should not be rushing to sign FTAs. So I wanted to have your comments on that, sir.
No, I say this only because whatever little studies we have done based on data, be it in the Niti Aayog, be it the 2015-16 Economic Survey, which touched on preferential trade agreements, be it the RBA's study in 2019, all of which suggested that the trade balance as a consequence of FTAs has been lopsided. We have had more imports than exports, number one. Number two, it is not as if exports to the non-FTA countries suffered because we had FTAs. In fact, the Niti Aayog study suggests that exports to the FTA countries were lesser than the exports to the non-FTA countries. So, which is why I suggest that we should go forward very cautiously. We have enormous non-tariff barriers in each one of these countries they're talking of. EU has very aggressive non-tariff barriers. And look, the benefit which we will get in terms of tariff concessions in each one of these countries is minimal. The rates of duty are far lesser than the rates of duty which India has. So what we will be giving is much more. And again, what we lose in terms of revenue, I'm a revenue man, so I'll tell you the numbers. It's 60,000 odd crores which we lost in terms of duty foregone, which is a budgetary document, right? So and there has been a lot of misuse of FTAs also. We have had gold coming in through the FTA route. We have had TVs coming in through the FTA route. We have had industries again getting completely shutting down because of FTA imports. So these are the challenges we should be aware of.
So what is the kind of due diligence required prior to signing any FTA?
Do we need to have an FTA with that country concerned? What are the current exports? What is it that we plan to have through an FTA? Look, ultimately an FTA is for promoting exports. I mean, that is our key aim. Imports is collateral damage, which happens as a consequence of an FTA. So, and if you want to have an import, what is the sort of import we're looking at, where you can value add? Do we have the industry? FTAs are much more than merchandise exports. They're also services and investments and other related things. How many Indian industries are capable of going and investing in Australia? I can name one or two only at best, or in UK or in EU, which is and service sectors. These are sectors again which are extremely difficult to penetrate. They impose any number of conditionalities. So I believe the Indian industries' concerns should be closely kept in mind while going forward in FTA. It's not one of those things which say, look, I've had FTA X country, country 1, 2, 3, and tick the boxes. It's much, much more than that, because you're giving in a lot of things and you have to be prepared for that. Is your Indian industry competitive enough to meet the preferential import competition? Do you want to ring fence some things? You want to have an FTA in Australia, they're going to bring in dairy products, which is one of their primary aims. And we are one of the largest milk producers in the country, in the world. So why would you want to have preferential duty imports of dairy products, for instance, which is one of the key reasons why we walked out of RCEP by the last minute. So there are multiple concerns here. Due diligence would involve taking the Indian industry and their concerns in mind before stepping forward, and ensuring that whatever we agree for our reciprocal imports are items and inputs which the Indian industry can be in a position to compete with preferential imports coming in.
Do you think, since we are signing so many FTAs, is India conducting necessary due diligence for the future FTAs?
I think they are. As I told you, some lessons have been learned. And unfortunately, though some studies were conducted through the IIM Bangalore and the IIFT and others, this has not come out in the public domain. I've seen it, but it's not come out in the public domain. I wish there's a lot more transparency, simply because the Indian industry should know what they're in for, right? So I think some diligence has been done this time around. I believe that there's a belief that we will not make the same mistakes. But we're dealing with very, very, very seasoned negotiators. Australia, UK, EU are very seasoned negotiators. And we keep changing our negotiators far too often. I can tell you that in the course of a FTA discussion, we have a new person almost going every second meeting. And that doesn't help matters at all in conducting a good FTA. We don't empower them enough, is one more issue which I found in my personal experience, to take decisions there. So I believe that we have done some due diligence. I hope we are going with our eyes open and be aware of the consequences. There should be a lot more transparency, and the trade and industry should be a lot more involved. We need to speak out. The trade needs to speak out and tell things which concerns them, not what the government wants to hear.
So also at the same time, the existing FTAs are over a decades old. Isn't there a need to conduct a thorough due diligence of the same to ascertain if they are even required?
Look, reviews are being done of all these FTAs. The India-ASEAN FTA, for instance, is having a review process. All our FTAs have a clause for review, wherein you can look back at see how you need to go forward. The WTO permits it. So the review is taking place, and hopefully that review would mean some degree of back and forth, because both countries have to again agree. It will not look proper for India to walk out of an FTA, right? So I believe that reviews are taking place, and hopefully the results of the review would mean again tightening up on sectors where we have been hurt, and trying to get access in sectors where we have not been able to make much headway thus far.
Najib sir, I will ask you two more questions, but before that, I'd like to ask one poll question from our audience, if you allow.
Please.
So audience, the question is on your screen. Please start voting. The question is, India's steel imports from the FTA nation is over 60% of the total steel imports. Would signing new FTA increase this share? Your options are simple. Either you feel yes, then press yes, or no, then no. India's steel imports from FTA nations is over 60% of the total steel imports. Would signing new FTA increase the share? People watching on YouTube, please comment your answers in the comment section, please. So we have the answers now. Answer on your screen. 75% of our audience feels yes. So signing new FTAs would increase. They feel it would increase steel imports further into the country. 75% feels, while 25% feels no. So my next question to you. The FDI inflow from the existing or new FTA partner versus the actual merchandise trade, should there be a healthy relationship or not? What do you think?
Ideally, yes. Ideally, yes. I mean, we would like to have investments in the country, which is why we are opening up your sectors. And that has not really happened. I think your question also suggested that except for Japan, which has shown huge imports, investments in the country. None of the FTA partners really have shown much investment. Investment again is something which is not going to be done by the governments from these countries. It's going to be done by private individuals, private industries. And if you have preferential import access, they don't need to really invest into the country, right? So, which has not happened. Ideally, yes, it should balance itself out, which has not happened at all.
So my last question to you. Currently, the FDI inflow from the existing FTA partners is negligible, except Japan, when compared the mammoth trade deficit with the same partners. So your comments, please, on that.
Yeah, again, I repeat what I said earlier, which is unfortunate. It is unfortunate, and I wish we could have had greater investments from these countries, which could have offset the perception that FTAs have not been good. Your polls are overwhelmingly saying that FTAs are not a great thing to happen for the country. So I hope and pray, at least in these FTAs, we are going forward into, we look at all these aspects and ensure that we get enough investments. I did hear the last part of the speakers who talked about Nippon. There's an inherent contradiction. You want to go for an FTA, you want to have Nippon, you have to balance the two. And I don't know whether you're aware, the customs, the last budget also brought in the rules to enforce rules of origin, right? Which again, in effect, meant that you are tightening up FTA imports. And it doesn't, those things don't go hand in hand, because by an FTA import, you're giving preferential rates of duties. Yes, you would like to ensure that the rules of origin are being adhered to, which means the certificates are correctly being given. But the rules as they stand today involve a verification process whereby you write back to the same authority who has issued the certificate and say, please tell me whether you issued the certificate correctly. 99%, I can tell you from my experience, the answer is always yes. And this is true, same for India too. We also stand by what our export inspection councils certify and say, yes, the answer is yes. So it doesn't really help. And we know that cases of fraud have taken place where value addition norms have not been met. So we need to balance FTA imports with all other policy steps which we are taking, which is Atmanirbharta, which is emphasis on ensuring that we procure from local sources with the rules in place by the customs, the Carator rules they're known as, right, which have come in and which have tightened up a lot of imports, even, and obviously in the process, legitimate imports also get hurt. So I think we need to balance these inherent contradictions even as we go forward into various other FTAs.
Right, Najib sir. So before you go, I'd like to ask the entire panel if they have any question or comment which they would like to share with you. So Ranjan ji, Sharad ji, if you have anything, or Dr. Murali, Kallummal, or Dr. James, or Mr. Seetharaman, with Mr. Najib Shah.
Yeah, Monica, I will just like to ask one thing with Mr. Najib Shah. So thanks for your views, which are very important. My views, you just made a comment that while the learnings from the FTA and the points to be considered before going forward with for new FTAs is the trade, import, export, the total trade value. I just wanted to say that as a country, we see the trade value, or it should be, I feel that in my view, it should be industry specific also, at least some few critical industries rather than at a country level in terms of the import export. Is this the way we look into? Also, we go into the details. This is just my.
No, you see, ultimately it depends upon which country you're having an FTA with and the industry which is relevant for that particular country. Right. So if you're talking of EU, I would look at textiles, I would look at footwear, I would look at leather, I would look at engineering goods. These are areas where we have strengths and which are doing well in those markets. I'm competing there in EU with Bangladesh, for instance, which has the advantage of being still an LDC. So I will ensure that I try and negotiate to get the similar sort of rates for my products when it comes to an EU. So the industry will depend entirely on the country you're looking at and negotiating and the strengths we have in exporting to that particular country. So yes, otherwise the Indo-ASEAN, for instance, covers almost the entire tariff. It goes to around 85% of the tariff lines, which really hurts us, right? But then it's a group of 10 countries, and the concerns of each country meeting them has resulted in us extending our preferential treatment to such a large array of goods. So yes, it hurts us. So I think industry-wise, depending on the country with whom we are negotiating.
Thank you. Yeah, that is what exactly. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Najib Shah. I have a question to you, because, you spoke about language being a barrier for exporters. How come the language has not been a barrier for the RFTA partners? My case in point is in actually Chinese exports to India and all other ASEAN countries in Japan and, various other Korean exporters. And whereas we find it very difficult to do the same in their country. Is it language alone or price also is an important factor? Because I feel always the price talks more than, and quality doesn't matter presently, So price speaks. Yeah.
Mr. Shah, you're there? Sir, you're there?
Yes. Hello.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
No, I was simplifying matters. Cultural issues is what I would like to broadly address. Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me, please?
Yeah, there is some. Yeah, I can.
Some audio problem is there. Yeah.
Shah, sir, are you able to hear us?
Because Monica,
for the Indian importer to do business in
Najib, sir, I think your internet is, it's shaking a lot. We are not able.
Or Japan or Korea.
Sir, we are not able to hear you. So with this,
So Monica, if I may, respond to that question not from the government's perspective, but from an industry perspective of how we have felt from the business perspective. I think, yes, not alone. I think what Mr. Najib was trying to show, it was what he meant by, if I could hear him rightly, if I am, pardon me if I am quoting him wrongly, but what I could gather is what he was saying, that by language, he mentioned the whole culture. And I think that culture part is very important because what happens in many of these countries, buying locally or buying nationally, buying within the country is like a cultural thing more than, other things. So that also plays negatively for when you are exporting to these countries. So I think some minister also mentioned recently that in India, even if something is available, 10 rupees cheaper and we immediately go for import, probably part of the culture that we need to improve, So, and I don't think it is linked to the price because we have seen even if the price is more competitive, what is the prevailing price in that country? Still, people do not want to go for import, and I think that is a cultural change that we have to do in our country, than blaming the other country.
I think you're right. So, Dr. Murali, I hope you have received the answer. Najib, sir, are you there? Because your mic is on mute. Yeah. Yeah. Sir.
Yeah.
Sir, before you go, you'd like to add something to Mr. Ranjan's comment?
No, I could hear only partially. His latter half of the comment I could catch on to, but I think I got the sense of what he was trying to say. I think FTAs going forward, we should do it with great amount of caution. Again, with our eyes open, with lessons learned, and the industry needs to really bring to the notice of the Commerce Ministry its concerns. Your polls are an excellent indicator that most people do not want to have an FTA, right? So having said that, I think the government is very keen to have FTAs. So it's better that you engage with the government. The Commerce Ministry is more than willing to hear inputs and take inputs. Engage the negotiators, bring forth your concerns so that you can protect your interest and make access into the markets which the FTAs should provide.
Right, sir. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, I just have to peel off because I've got some other, I've left an ongoing engagement and joined you all. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you,
Najib, for joining us and taking out time.
Thank you so much.
With this, we will start our part 3, viewers. So there, in part 3, we will be discussing issues faced related to trade laws, WTO rules, FTAs, pros and cons, review mechanism by Mr. Seetharaman, Dr. James, and Dr. Murali Kallummal. And before I start part 3, I would like to raise one more poll question. Please be active on your screen to start voting. The question is, India moved from local to global and Atmanirbhar Bharat. Would they be benefited by the FTAs? Your options are 3, yes, no, or it depends. India moves from local to global and Atmanirbhar Bharat. Would they be benefited by the FTAs? And people watching on YouTube, please start posting your answers on the comment section. India moves from local to global and Atmanirbhar Bharat. Would they be benefited by the FTAs? We have the results on your screen. So 41, oh my God, this is such a mix. 41% feels yes, 40% feels depends. So it can depend on the factors, and 19% feels no. So 41% feels that this may be benefited by the FTAs, while 40% feels it depends on the factors. I request Mr. Seetharaman, Dr. James, and Dr. Murali to please unmute your mics. I'm starting the questions for you. The question which first I would like to ask is, do you agree that reciprocity is the key to success of FTAs? I'll start with Mr. Seetharaman, then Dr. James, and then Dr. Murali Kallummal. Do you agree reciprocity is the key to success of FTAs? Sir.
Good afternoon to everyone. I would think, reciprocity is an inadequate word, because no two countries have same set of resources, are equal resources, are equal in terms of their capability to produce products, marketability, cost efficiency, and natural resources, everything. So what we are looking at is to assess the key strength in that country, maybe in one sector, and what it would do to our country if they want to harness their full strength in that particular sector and start exporting more to our country. What will happen to us? Similarly, what are the strengths in our country and what we can export to them, and how do we harness our strength to the maximum potential? And only in this manner the reciprocity would be there. Other than that, if you look at, I have given you on steel, so you should also give me on steel, something like that. If that's a reciprocity that we are talking about, we are not correct in understanding it. So we have to look at our strengths and the strength of our partner country, and then each one should try to leverage their strengths, and that is where we have to look at it. There may be a situation where we simply give for a particular sector, a free concession to another one country and we don't seek a reciprocity at all. That is how I would look at it, insofar as the reciprocity is concerned.
Right. Dr. James, your comment, please. Dr.
I
James,
couldn't hear you. Not audible.
your mic is on. Just 1 second. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I broadly agree with what Mr. Seetharaman is saying. So when we think about a reciprocity, I think most of the FTA partners do not have equally corresponding strengths and weaknesses. And in the context of the WTO itself, that was actually one of the major issues in the early part, and that's why they came up with the principle of less than full reciprocity, especially with respect to developing countries and LDCs. In the context of free trade agreement, I think one way of looking at reciprocity is actually may not be an accurate thing, but it is generally done. Most of the people look at the trade balance or the trade deficit and say that these agreements are not actually working to the benefit of both the countries. But I think that is again a very crude way of looking at it. Sometimes even without the FTA, the trade balance may persist. So this is again one of the concerns about India. A lot of people say that since India joined this kind of agreements, our trade deficit basically enlarged. That may be true, but if you really look at a very neutral and objective assessment, even without the trade agreement, the trade balance might have actually grown, because some countries have become extremely competitive, and especially when you look at China for that matter. China is a major. China has got trade deficit with many countries, especially with the Western countries, in fact. So even without an FTA, they are able to have that kind of a trade deficit. Look at the clear example of the United States. Look at the trade imbalance between the United States and China. They don't have an FTA for that matter. So it is very difficult to really look at and identify the meaning of the term reciprocity. But I agree on the whole that there should be some kind of a balanced trade, in the sense that if 20% was actually the trade deficit before the signing of the FTA, it cannot become 40% later. So that is why this kind of review mechanisms within the FTAs can, to an extent, help in achieving what you call as a balanced trade.
Right, sir. Dr. Murali, do you agree the reciprocity is the key to success of FTA?
Yeah, I basically agree with the idea of reciprocity, but as James also pointed out that we need to make an assessment of sectors based on trade balance. But unfortunately, let me speak the economists, bring in the economists had current account and capital account, these two are governed globally in a very unbalanced manner. Now, by saying current account, I mean goods, and by saying capital account, I broadly mean services. So when we say India is competitive in service sector, we do not have trade balance for this service sector, bilateral trade balance. So how do we say which sector and what product or what services we have comparative advantage, and what gain we would be reciprocal for the losses which we make in the goods sector? So the idea of reciprocity actually stems from data availability. And data availability, as we see, is a highly imbalanced manner. Data is available for goods, which is generally available for across sector, across products at most disaggregate level. But whereas when you talk about investment and capital flows, the data is very reluctantly available. And we do not have data with the intra-government bodies. Always it is maintained by private sector, and they are priced. So it is very, very difficult to provide an academic input or a policy-oriented input by the policymakers beforehand. So this imbalance being there, it is primarily the responsibility becomes on the big guesswork done by the policymakers. So most of the time we have done a broad brush assessment of these reciprocity principles, and as was also said before, I agree to most of the points made by the panelists. here, and I also agree that we do not actually share the same kind of endowment. Sometimes we are better off and sometimes we are worse off. But it becomes also important, what is the extent of formal sector in our economies? So when we have formal sector, the better data availability is there. So that with that point, I would like to end.
Right, sir. Yeah. My next question is, do you think that all FTAs should be for a specific time period only? When the dynamics of the global trade are changing almost every day, then why should we have Stone Age FTAs remain the same? I'll start with Mr. Seetharaman, Dr. James, and then Dr. Murali. Mr. Seetharaman, sir.
Once you bring in an FTA, it means you are bringing in or ushering in an era of free trade. And if you say, I will have it for 5 years and thereafter I will not have it, it will be going back to Stone Age. And so what I would look at it is, an FTA is not going back to Stone Age, but it is actually an agreement, carved in stone. So you have to give some kind of a permanency to it. I won't say it is forever. We don't know what is forever means, but it will be practically impossible to go back to an older situation in terms of trade itself. It is going to affect not only the importing country which is feeling the heat, it's going to affect the exporting country which has higher exports of the two FTA countries. That country's exports and their industry also is going to suffer. So it is not going to be a win-win for both. It's going to be a loss for both, quite possible. And therefore, what I would think is, if you get into a problem with a FTA and you are facing highly increased imports from a partner country, we have to look at a situation where we find a market solution whereby we are able to bring in or bring up our capacity to produce those products. We pump in money for that industry to do research, to do capital investments, to do capacity building, and they become capable of producing it in India, so that you have an equally competitive industry in India and overcome the problem of imports. So long as we don't focus, I would say from the government side, we don't focus on nurturing an industry that is needing support in the context of a FTA onslaught, I think that is really bad. We have to look at a situation where we nurture those industries that need support, and then push up the industrial output and make it highly competitive, so that the market takes care of these anomalies.
Dr. James, your comment, please.
When you think about any kind of a trade agreement or an economic treaty, it is hard to believe that they're actually signed forever. But at the same time, the purpose is to provide some kind of a security and predictability. So if an investment is coming from one particular location to an FTA partner, then this kind of time-bound FTA can actually make the business completely unstable or subject to the vicissitudes of the incumbent political regime. So FTA should be there for some time. The review mechanisms can actually do a certain kind of a course correction, either in terms of the substantive provisions or in terms of the market access commitment. So when you think about the Stone Age FTAs, I think if you look at some of the modern FTAs, I'm talking about the CPTPP or even the CETA agreement, or some of the modern agreements, they're very different from the FTAs of the 2000. So I think they include a lot of issues, new age issues, digital issues, electronic commerce matters, data privacy issues. So in terms of coverage and depth, I think they have become extremely sophisticated. So I will shudder to call them even Stone Age agreements. They're evolving very fast. But at the same time, most of these kind of provisions are added at the behest of a particular industry. So that is why the industry will have to really look at smart provisions which can be negotiated in the agreements. That is why we have to be always flexible and we have to be nimble in terms of identifying the kind of safeguards we require in this kind of FTAs. So I won't actually call them Stone Age. We have to evolve, and we have to insert provisions that will suit us.
Right. Dr. Murali.
Yeah, I would broadly, I would largely agree with the panel, and we cannot call any FTA a Stone Age FTA, but rather make the review process stronger and more effective. And given when we sign an FTA, we have to incorporate maybe if we come down to zero, also eliminated the tariff. But if the imports is going up beyond a point, destroying the domestic production capacity here, that means your loss of employment, and your loss of employment means aggregate demand. So we are actually causing a huge damage to this great nation, where we actually create future beggars. So I would like to go to the extreme scenario. So to what extent to a country, a population will buy? Generally buy up to domestic savings. So we cannot actually drive the population to beggar thy neighbor status scenario. That said, I think we should recall that ITA was signed in 1996 and it came into effect in 2005. Virtually all telecommunication manufacturing units in this country shut down. Where did it come back? So there is no way we can have a scenario wherein a whole industry just closes lock, stock, and barrel. So that sort of a scenario cannot be encouraged at all. And so FTAs needs to be having provisions for review mechanism and also provisions to have many of these unseen eventualities. So I don't know how you bring it in, but there needs to be a broad statement. Maybe James can add some to what legal language could bring in, unseen happenings in the future.
Right. So I will ask one last question, and then we will open the house for audience Q&A. So this last question is, I will start with Dr. Murali, this time reverse order, Dr. Murali, Dr. James, and then Mr. Seetharaman. The question is, India's review mechanism of the existing FTAs is not in the interest of any industry. Do you agree or you don't agree? If please provide the answers. Yeah, reasons. Yeah.
Let me divide the. My answer would be the same, as the earlier question was, because largely I focused on review mechanism. Now, in the US has come out with a very interesting study. It has actually come out with the impact on US output, US income, US trade, then US labor market, and distributional effects. So what they say is, all the FTAs have done is in terms of output. They have actually real GDP only increased by 0.5%. So it has virtually done nothing in terms of impact on GDP output. And on income, it has increased only 0.6%. This was a study done for 1988 to say 2019. So US Congress did it, and they submitted in June this year. And exports increased by 0.16, whereas import increased by 0.34%. So there is a trade deficit in the case of US, which is actually, and labor market, they say that only 0.3% is the increase in real wages, and increase in real workers is actually 0.3%. So FTA has not done good for US. So why should US sign an FTA with India? So that's a larger question. But answering that question, we need to look at GSP withdrawal. By withdrawing GSP, how did US benefit or how did US lose? I did an assessment of it because I took the data from United States ITC itself, trade portal, and I did an assessment that what kind of impact did GSP withdrawal have on India. We actually increased our number of products to exported to US by 700 products, whereas in the earlier periods we were only increasing by 200 and 300. So there is a stark increase in number of products just by GSP withdrawal, and that is why we don't see much of noise being made from India. But in terms of sectoral, you actually see a large shift maybe steel losing out and, many other sectors losing out. So of course, that with that, I want to stop my comments on.
Dr. James, please.
Thank you. So in the context of the FTA parlance, the most important fear that countries have is actually something called a FOMO. So FOMO stands for fear of missing out. Every country has actually this particular fear that if you do not sign an FTA with another country, then we are actually going to be, suffer in the long run because of their omission. Every country has this kind of a feeling actually. And when India withdrew from the RCEP, this was actually one of the questions many people also posed. Again, I think, the point is that when we have a review of this FTA, it is not possible to say that it is not in the interest of any industry. The very objective of the review is that it will have to actually support our industries. It will have to support the economy as a whole. So a review process can basically help in terms of making some kind of a course correction, as I earlier mentioned. It can also help in terms of doing some kind of a better monitoring mechanism. So we have been talking mainly about tariffs actually, and some of the speakers in the meeting have been talking about non-tariff barriers, sometimes cultural preferences. So these are areas which we can definitely negotiate, take up with the other country in the context of an FTA platform. So we have to always remember that every FTA has got a very smart, I think, institutional mechanism for ironing out the differences. So India had recent issues with Singapore, India. India could actually initiate a process for resolving some of the differences. So even when we think about WTO, the agreement is not actually the most important. We have got various committees, institutional mechanisms, dispute settlement provisions, which can be put to use. So when we think about the FTA, don't look at only the tariff differential or the tariff commitments given, but look at the other institutional features being brought by the FTA. And as a country, we should be able to make use of these things in a more effective and better manner.
Right, sir. Mr. Seetharaman, sir.
Yeah.
On
See, reviewing an FTA is not going to be easy. We have given some commitments and we want to go back on it. Having a provision in the agreement is only an enabling kind of a provision. So there will be forces, say, let us assume for a minute, India-Korea FTA, where Korean exports to India in terms of steel, in terms of, say, chemical, at least these two industries have increased manifold as compared to the pre-FTA period. Now, if you want to go back and negotiate with Korea, they have been smart enough to identify these areas and get a free trade or a higher concession or a zero duty concession. Now, if that government is supposed to go back on it and then it has to agree to say 5% or a 7%, 7.5% duty, it's going to be very difficult for the Korean government to convince its own industry. So it will be a kind of a non-starter. But it does not mean that we shouldn't try. What one can try? Can we have a give and take? Can we identify something else which we can give it to them? Now, if they agree, say for instance, to introduce certain things, introduce a specified number of products or so say number of specified amount of capital into India, that would give some more benefit to the Indian industry or Indian economy. We have to look at what Indian government can offer to Korea or what India can offer to Japan to amend this anomaly like situations. Until and unless we are able to identify what is a trade-off that we are going to give it to Korea or Japan or any other country for that matter, simply thinking about reviewing an FTA agreement which is causing trouble to you is only in the wish list. It's not going to be practical. So therefore, we have to think what they call out-of-the-box solutions to come out and offer them something in return. That's how I would like to look at it. Thank you.
Monica, I would like to add something on the non-tariff measures, which James also said, because they're being increasingly brought by different markets. Now, Center for WTO Studies has a database on SPS and TBT, which identifies HS code-wise, which is not even done by even WTO, because they are bound by membership. Whatever information is provided by the members, they only give based on that. But Center, me and my team, we sit and read the notifications and provide HS codes. And we make that publicly available, free for use. This I wanted to say here.
Right, sir. So with this, we will end part 3 and we are opening the house for Q&As. Shahji, you wanted to ask one question to the panel?
Yes, maybe I'll request Dr. James if you can just throw light or any of our other panelists. Like, so there are two things which we have to see the change when we are going forward for new FTAs. What it was signed maybe 10 years back. Like ESG now is playing a very, very important role going forward with the commitment of the government of India and all countries in the Paris climate. And there is going to be an impact on the global trade is what is anticipated very strongly. In terms of, like, people are talking of carbon tax related things. So will that aspect be a part when we are going ahead with any country in terms of the FTA, in terms of the imports and all? But we should not that we are importing carbon also along with the product. What are the carbon footprints? And second thing, going forward, a change which we are seeing, though it is extreme, which is being talked, which is far-fetched, that world minus China, people are writing. Maybe, but yes, it is anticipated that in going forward, maybe next 10 years, 15 years, maybe there will be a reduced dependence, China dominance in the rest of the world in overall trade. Still, we are anticipating, but it is being talked about. So will these two factors also be a part of the discussions when as an individual, as a country, we are going ahead in talks with FTA and other countries? Will these two factors play a role?
Yeah.
I think Mr. Sharad actually asked a very, very important question. So we have seen a very recent initiative by the European Union called the Fit for 55, or actually what they call as the carbon border tax adjustment mechanism. It hasn't been actually put into place, but it may kick in by 2023. And for some other countries like India, it may actually become operational by 2026. So the European Union looks pretty determined to actually bring in the carbon border tax adjustment mechanism. And the UK has also a similar mechanism. So many countries are actually proposing very similar mechanisms. So, and if you look at me, whether India can actually take up this issue as part of the bilateral negotiations, of course it can. But I should also point out that the same issue has come up on multiple occasions before the WTO. So there was a meeting in March in the WTO, and this carbon tax mechanism came up for very detailed discussions. So many people have even examined the point whether it is a WTO compatible mechanism, whether a country can actually impose carbon tax for carbon emitted not in that country but in a foreign country. So it is a very interesting debate. But I should also mention that the tide is now actually favoring the proponents of CBA because of a variety of factors. The recent climate change issues that we have seen in multiple locations give some kind of an impetus for a CBA. But I think I completely get your point that we had to make it as part of the negotiation, or we had to take it up on a bilateral basis.
Right, sir. We have received some questions from the audience. This question has been asked by Mr. Abhishek Sinha from SAIL. This question is to Mr. Ranjan Dhar. So you're there, Ranjan sir?
Yeah, very much there.
Okay, so his question is, would you agree that academicians and industry practitioners tend to have opposite views on FTAs?
Good question.
Very good question, but I don't have any answer. I don't know, because I have not found any such instances where they have been dramatically different. I think there are similar views also. When you think about India as a country, then the views cannot be different. I would say. So Because we are talking from the country's perspective, not from an industry perspective or from an product perspective. If you're talking about the country's perspective, then views cannot be different, because what we discuss in this forum, Monica, is that if India has a high population, that population needs to have more income for it to purchase more, for it to plow back to the economy, for the economy to grow.
Yes.
These are this is a spectrum. Now, if that spectrum has to be, if that is true, if we have to achieve this entire thing, then you have to do things very differently. You cannot go by the concept of the book, and I'm not talking about academicians, but you cannot go by the concept of the book that, okay, FTA will be there. Can I mean, if I do this, some country will get upset. No, first you have to think about the Indian growth first, and as a part of that growth, what we need to do.
I think I will correct that. Popular book, one can say.
Okay.
Monica, if I can just put a word, academicians and theoreticians are always right in the long run, but not in the short run.
We have this question from Mr. Abheshwar Sahai. He's asking, what should India do so that FTA do not end up dealing with proxy countries who may be attempting using the FTA for routing of material? So this is an open question to all the panelists. I will ask one by one. Maybe we can start with Mr. Ranjan Dhar again, then Mr. Sharad, then we will take up to Mr. Seetharaman, Dr. Murali and Dr. James. Ranjan,
no, I
sir.
think there are more expert people who can comment on that. But I was saying that there are mechanisms to track that, the country of origin and everything else. The tools are available. How well they are implemented is probably the question. I think if we implement those things, those can be tracked, and those routing of material. Even if you see the way US was trying to tight manage their routing when they implemented Rule 232, that no material could originate out of the country which were put at the blocks. So I think there are tools are available. How well we implement in India is a question. But I think there are more expert people on the panel who can comment on that.
Right.
Yeah, Monica, I also, what Ranjan is saying, there is definitely, this is something which is being used and which needs to be acted upon. Just to give an example, that we have to work on the specific rules that confer the origin just based on CTS, that this code to subheading, trade subheading, by changing that, change in trade subheading and putting it as a new product without any or insignificant or a minimal value addition. And there are cases like, if we go through the details of various products, you see from routing through Singapore and Malaysia, where there are no known capacities or capabilities available for those products. If the routing is happening, I think this needs to be strictly and very tightly looked into going forward at least. So I also feel that this is an area which needs better focus and control going forward. This is a learning from our past, is what I will say.
Seetharaman, sir. I'll repeat the question once again. I'll repeat the question once again. So the question which was asked was, what should India do so that the FTA do not end up dealing with proxy countries? That is the question. Who may attempt using FTA for routing of materials, sir?
Right. See, there are two things in this question. One is, the goods actually originate in a non-FTA country. That's a country with which India does not have an FTA. And it goes to an FTA country, and from there it comes. Okay, this is one kind of a problem. It's really a proxy country. The other is, goods originate in a country with which, say, if it is an RCEP situation, goods originate in, say, China, goes to Vietnam or Malaysia or Singapore, and from there some value addition takes place, some maybe 2%, 3%, 5%, whatever it is, and then it comes to India. It is still within the RCEP. Okay, so when you are looking at a group of countries entering into a single FTA, then the problem is more complicated. We may think that this is actually Chinese material may come from Singapore in the name of Singapore origin, but it's an RCEP origin material. Okay. So something like that. So I'm only talking about the concepts. So if you are looking at a group of countries and a group origin, vis-a-vis a single country and a single origin, then the solution for the problem is different. Okay. In either case, the real solution lies in a very correct way of, or a very rational way of determining the rules of origin. That negotiation is very, very, very critical. If we miss out at that point of negotiating the rules of origin for a particular product, then you are gone, unless you amend that rules of origin. So there are some rules of origin where it only says a change in tariff headings, and there is no value addition required. This has happened in some product, I think in copper and aluminum industries. It's creating a lot of problems for Indian industries. But that is where the negotiation is very, very important. And that is where the industry's participation in the negotiation, not only in tariff lines, but also in respect to rules of origin, is very critical.
Right, sir. Murali sir and Dr. James, your comments.
Yeah, see, there are two parts to answer this question. One is, we have a rules of origin chapter in the WTO, which has not been agreed to, and that is called as non-preferential rules of origin. And since it's not been agreed to, it has not been implemented. We have an FTA rules of origin, which is called a preferential rules of origin. What Mr. Shah also mentioned in the morning, couple of minutes before, that we have a problem with respect to asking the country whether what you've issued. We are asking the same agency the question, so obviously you'll get the answer yes. And that also, has to be in a time-bound manner, because when you report trade data, you cannot report trade data, preferential trade data after 3 or 4 months, or say 6 months. You will have to report on a monthly basis. So you will have to identify a country and put it on a monthly basis. So the time here is the crux, and time-bound response is the crux of the matter. And we need to get response from the other country also. Classic case is, when we imposed a ban on China, imports started coming in from Vietnam and Hong Kong. So we had no control. So if we would have had a non-preferential rules of origin, we would have controlled it, and that would have been an MF tariff product. So it used duty concessions given to ASEAN.
Right. Dr. James, you'd like to add something to this?
Yeah, so my first comment is that if you anticipate a proxy country sending its own materials and getting the originating status under a free trade agreement, that issue has to be identified even at the start of the negotiation. It is not difficult to get that information. And if there's a possibility of that, there are multiple ways in which you can actually develop safeguards, or maybe firewalls actually. One is, carving out a very good bilateral accumulation principle. Sometimes you can actually come up with basic minimum operations requirement, or there should be a qualifying operation in that particular country from which the good is actually claiming originating status. So there are multiple ways in which this issue can be tackled. My own feeling is that having the dual qualification of CTSs plus certain amount of value addition is actually good criteria, a good criterion when compared to some of the other suggestions or alternatives being mooted. So ideally, if you anticipate a proxy country using the FTA route in order to circumvent or in order to make use of the third country FTA, it has to be identified immediately. And I don't think that it's a difficult challenge.
Right. So I will ask 2 more questions, and I request all the panelists to answer it very, very quickly and keep it very, very precise. And then after that, I will ask Mr. Seetharaman to conclude the session. So my second last question is, withdrawing from RCEP is still being seen as a wrong decision. What are your comments on this, please? We will start from Mr. Ranjan Dhar. Please keep your answers very, very short. Mr. Sharad, please be online. We are just having 2 more questions. Ranjan sir, on RCEP.
Yeah, sorry, I missed the question. Can you hear the question again, please?
Withdrawing from RCEP is still being seen as a wrong decision. What is your comment on that?
It's a difficult answer, frankly, with you. But I think if we again go back to my previous answer, if we look at India interest first, then I'm not very sure whether we should have signed this.
Sharad sir, your comment. Sir, your mic is on mute.
Yeah, Monica, coming out of RCEP being seen as a wrong step, I will say that the pros and cons, if we go into the details, maybe you have asked me to be precise, I feel it is too premature to say that. Maybe some of the things I feel I see in a positive way, the learnings of the past FTAs, the impact of that. But in my opinion, my view is, I'm to be very frank, that whatever I am reading, I am getting contradictory views on this, that it is wrong. But in my opinion, personally, if you ask me, it is not coming out of that, because I was seeing more of negatives for the country rather than positives, and the risks involved were extremely high if we go into the details.
Right. Dr. James, your comment, please.
You know, when we think about signing an FTA or entering into an FTA, it cannot be purely dictated by economic theories or principles. So first of all, when I really look at your polls, you know, they overwhelmingly state the mood of the people. And the mood of the people actually lends a legitimacy to any kind of a trade agreement. You know, even if it is a good or a bad agreement, ultimately, the powers that they will have to look into the public mood. And that is coming out very clearly from your poll in this. It may be either accurate or inaccurate, but that is actually the public perception. And I think it has to be respected. But, you know, I don't think that any agreement is actually a short agreement. I think nowadays UK is thinking about joining the RCEP. So when situations change, I think nothing stops the government from taking a fresh look at the matter. So
Dr.
I think the jury is still out on this issue.
Right, sir. Dr. Murali.
See, I cannot be seen contradicting myself because I have written against RCEP in public forums. So I would say that, you know, it has to be a nuanced view, and, you know, whenever we, as Professor James said, you know, whenever we agree to sign an RCEP, we need to do our homework properly and thoroughly, and we need to collect information at a more HS code-wise level, product-wise level, and also incorporate the information which comes from the e-way bills, and make a complete assessment about production and consumption within the country, and then join RCEP.
Mr. Seetharaman.
Yeah, you know, India was not and is still not prepared to join RCEP. It would have been a colossal mistake if India had signed it. So I strongly feel that India was right in coming out of RCEP.
Now, my last question. What is one best suggestion you would like to give to the government with reference to signing new FTAs? One best suggestion, and please keep your suggestions unique. I'll start with Mr. Ranjan Dhar.
I think one suggestion would be that I think we spoke about it earlier, is in the review, please make the inputs broad-based. It has to be done industry-wise, it has to be done product-wise, it has to be done segment-wise. If there is broad-based participation from individual industry, that will enable us to look at this thing in detail and you know, make a review more pragmatic and more beneficial for India as a country. Thank you.
Sharad sir, one best suggestion.
Monica, Monica, I am not able to. I will be very, very precise, but maybe I'll like to have two suggestions, not one. One is, of course, that strict enforcement of rule of origin is very, very important to avoid the misuse and the value addition part. This is in category one. I will say that minimum value addition is extremely important. These are the two factors where I see maximum leakage. And the second is that consultation with the industry before we go ahead, a thorough involvement of the industry specifics to take an overall view and not just taking that what has been said by the experts also here, not just to take care of industry to industry matching, but at least take the pros and cons from the industry experts while taking an overall decision with the country. These are my.
Dr. Murali.
Yeah, see, actually, I would like to stick to my line, we have a huge gap in terms of production, consumption, and, export and import. When we look at it, export and import is actually month-wise, day-wise also can be got. But production and consumption in this country has a lag of 4 years. It's criminal, now this can be only matched by the use of goods and services tax, GST, and also e-way bills. So some way of matching should be done before we go and sign an FTA at the policymaker level. This can be done, and it is readily available with the Ministry of Finance people. Yeah.
Dr. James, your suggestion, please.
In fact, we are actually helping the government. So any kind of, it is presumptuous to give comments actually on this point. But I also tend to agree with Professor Murali that we should have good data, clear data on most of the aspects. And secondly, we have to actually create a network of institutions, I think think tanks and industry bodies with whom we can actually exchange and get timely feedback. For instance, I think steel sector is one sector which has got access to really good lawyers like Mr. Seetharaman, and they can represent these matters very effectively. At the same time, it's said about a lot of sectors in the country, right? So we need to get quality data, access to people who can meaningfully contribute to the discussions. So that is one thing I would tend to suggest.
Seetharaman, sir, I like to ask you the same question. And with this, I would also request you to please conclude the session, sir.
Okay. Thank you, James, for the nice words. But I am looking at the one best suggestion from a totally different perspective. Till now, the free trade agreements have been like declaration of intents or notification by two governments or all the multiple governments who are involved in the FTAs. There is no concrete achievable objective or a measurable objective for these countries to achieve. So it should be in the form of something like a contract where there is some objective listed out. If I have some strength, I would say that the exports should be like this in this sectors. And if it is going beyond that, there should be some countermeasure like some FTA should come from that country to this country. No, so those FTA targets should be fixed. And if it is not achieved, there should be some penalty of revising the concessions given or something like that. So it should be a kind of an agreement which provides for measurable objectives, and if those objectives are not achieved or breached by a significant margin or whatever margin you want to give, then there should be some automatic ways of readjusting the negotiations. If we do that, probably we can take care of a lot of problems. This suggestion may not be taken care of only by auto trigger or something like that, but there has to be some other concrete steps which the country should take. If that is done, probably it could be a win-win situation for all the partners in an FTA. Okay, now to make the concluding remarks, I think this has been a wonderful 95 or maybe close to 1 hour and 45 minutes, and we were really thrilled to hear the views of the industry from Mr. Ranjan, Dhar and Sharad, Mahendra, and I also appreciate the views of Mr. Najib Shah, ex-chairman of the CBIC or its equivalent in the past. And he also mentioned about the new rules that have been introduced by Government of India to plug the loopholes in rules of origin claims made by various importers, etc., and the problems that they face really, because most authorities who sign the certificate of origin will stick to their versions, so it is not going to help. So there are problems like this. But apart from those practical difficulties, he also mentioned that our exports to non-FTA countries is higher, and and we have lost about 60,000 crores of revenue from FTA countries' imports. So, and imports is collateral damage, and a number of other ideas he shared with us. And there were discussions about whether the FTAs have any contradiction with what you call inward-looking policies, and also whether the problems like the conflict between Atmanirbhar and other policies, and Make in India, and self-sufficiency and self-reliancy, and the open free imports. How do we sort out this conflict, etc.? Some good discussions took place. And above all, I liked the way our audience actually voted. There was no ambiguity in most of the questions. Now, I don't want to give a summary of all the talks made by the panelists. I just touched upon only a few items. But, staying out of RCEP was a good decision for India. 80% yes. Japan, Korea is a one-sided FTA. 67% yes. And signing FTAs will increase steel imports. 75% yes. Most of the questions, except in one question where there was 41 and 40 and 19, but that question itself was very well worded to get such a response. So I'm not very surprised, but it shows that the audience have been listening and they have been participating, and I am really, really happy that the audience have taken such a role. And as a parting remark, I would like to touch on only 2 points, very precise points. India is now trying to enter into an agreement with UK. Now, insofar as steel is concerned, UK has about 7.5 million tons of production, 3.5 for exports and 4 for domestic consumption. That's more or less the rough estimate. I'm just giving a very rough numbers. What will happen to steel imports from UK into India if zero duty is given to them? This one question which the steel industry should think about. Okay. The second, we have faced problems on the FTA from Korea and Japan, no doubt about it. Let us look at what's the kind of countries they are. They are countries with 100% capital account convertibility. Whether India is ready to enter into free trade agreements with 100% capital account convertibility. We don't have 100% capital account convertibility. Is this a factor why we are not able to harness the agreements to our benefit? This, I think, I leave it to Dr. Murali and other economists to think on this, and also the industry people who are participating in this. And your answers will enrich the government in its future negotiations. With this, I thank you very much, Monica, for giving me an opportunity, and thank each and every one of the audience and also every one of the panel members. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you so much, Seetharaman sir. With this, we end the session, and I would like to thank our expert panelists, starting from Dr. James, Professor, Head Center for Trade and Investment Law, IIFT, Mr. Sharad Mahendra, CEO, JSW Steel Coated Products Limited, Mr. Ranjan Dhar, CMO, ArcelorMittal, Nippon Steel India, Mr. Najib Shah, IRS, former Chairman, Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, Mr. Seetharaman, co-founder and specialist in international trade and WTO law at Sarvada Legal, Dr. Murali, Kallummal, Professor, Center for the WTO Studies, IIFT. I would like to thank our sponsors, starting from JSW Steel, ArcelorMittal, Nippon Steel India, and Jindal Steel and Power Limited. I also like to thank our audience for participating in the polls and staying with us for so long. And staying active all the time. Viewers, a recorded version of this webinar will be available on youtube.com. Please do not miss to subscribe. And for the report, you have to subscribe to mymetalogic.com. We will meet again soon with a new webinar. Till then, take care and goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharad sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. James, Dr. Murali. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
As India embarks on its accelerated growth journey, we are firmly placed to leave our mark in it. Together, we touch millions of lives and make them better every day.
पेश है कलश प्रीमियम कलर कोटेड स्टील जिसमें घुले हैं ऐसे रंग जो बदलते वक्त में भी रहे हमेशा आपके साथ अ क्वालिटी प्रोडक्ट बाय ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India.
As a building block in the self-reliant India story, JSPL succeeds when India grows. JSPL, contributing towards self-reliant India, humbly serving the nation.
As India embarks on its accelerated growth journey, we are firmly placed to leave our mark in it. Together, we touch millions of lives and make them better every day.
पेश है कलश प्रीमियम कलर कोटेड स्टील जिसमें घुले हैं ऐसे रंग जो बदलते वक्त में भी रहे हमेशा आपके साथ अ क्वालिटी प्रोडक्ट बाय ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India.
As a building block in the self-reliant India story, JSPL succeeds when India grows. JSPL, contributing towards self-reliant India, humbly serving the nation.
As India embarks on its accelerated growth journey, we are firmly placed to leave our mark in it. Together, we touch millions of lives and make them better every day.
पेश है कलश प्रीमियम कलर कोटेड स्टील जिसमें घुले हैं ऐसे रंग जो बदलते वक्त में भी रहे हमेशा आपके साथ अ क्वालिटी प्रोडक्ट बाय ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India.
As a building block in the self-reliant India story, JSPL succeeds when India grows. JSPL, contributing towards self-reliant India, humbly serving the nation.